looks like the clouds have swooped in today. Let's see if it starts raining, huh? And what's going on today? Lots of interesting stuff, actually. I guess the first one was related to the war and stuff in Ukraine, and you heard again, basically they're trying to get regular people just to use things like consumer drones to help out. Now initially it was just to monitor the area, to my understanding, but how about this? This says Ukrainians develop drone that drops Molotov cocktails. So they're actually weaponizing some of them. Hold my beer. Ukraine's army developed a drone to drop Molotov cocktails on its enemies, and one of the beer bottle turned weapons was unleashed Thursday. The small flying drone was developed by the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces and appears to have 4 blades. Its center console has a spot to hold the Molotov cocktail horizontally before it is remotely deployed. Photos on Thursday captured the drone dropping a bottle of Chernihiv beer in Kyiv. Now that was kind of the interesting thing because it said it was developed by them, but based on this picture, it almost looks like an Inspire, isn't it? That's what I would think anyways. And then afterwards you would put like a payload or something on it. Every day Ukrainians have been using Molotov cocktails in their effort to stave off invading Kremlin forces. In late February, workers at the Pravda brewery in Lviv decided to switch to producing the petrol bombs in anticipation of a further escalation of the war. So imagine that, adjusting your business and stuff like that too, I guess, to enable people to use these as weapons. And it says military instructors have been teaching civilians to use Molotov cocktails against the heavily armed Russian troops, and the instructions to build them reportedly have been aired on Ukrainian radio. So crazy to think about, huh? Like here, people will say, never do that. Yet they're actively, I guess, promoting and teaching people to make things, I guess, like a weapon in that case. Different times and different situations as well, I guess you could say. With that in mind, locally here, apparently something happened and they're going to lift the mask mandates and vaccine passports. Like this one says, BC lifting indoor mask mandate Friday, vaccine passport to end in coming weeks. BC is lifting its mask mandates for indoor public spaces Friday, and the use of vaccine passports will no longer be required in the coming weeks, health officials announced Thursday. Dr. Bonnie Henry and Health Minister Adrian Dix gave the update in the afternoon and shared a timeline for when the other health measures will be lifted. And it says here, with the science and the data top of mind, it clearly shows that our risks now are much lower. They're not zero, and we're not fully out of this yet, but I feel confident that we can safely make some further changes. So the mask mandates will be, I guess, removed, if that's what you want to say, pretty much like what, tomorrow or so? Whereas with the actual vaccine passport, that will not go into effect until April 8th. So that's kind of interesting. Well, it's a good thing, I think, overall, because when you look at the data, for the most part, I'm not a doctor or anything, but it seemed like for the mass majority of people, they're saying it simply doesn't work as intended with things like mandates, lockdowns, and so forth. So in that sense, it's good, and it makes you wonder what happened. So it's kind of fascinating to dive into, because I would say in my mind, I would still like to know what the heck is going on overall, because some stuff just doesn't make sense. Because just recently, actually, they released like a health order. This one here, it says order of the provincial health officer, and this generated a lot of, I guess, negative attention towards health officials, where people were criticizing them of ignoring science. Because what they were saying here in this order, it says unvaccinated people are at greater risk than vaccinated people of being infected with SARS-CoV-2, and unvaccinated people who are infected experience significantly higher rates of hospitalization, ICU level care, and invasive mechanical ventilation complications and death when compared with vaccinated people. Unvaccinated people are also at a higher risk of transmitting SARS-CoV-2 to other people, including vaccinated people. And then this in particular, I guess, is what got a lot of people riled up in general. It says the continued presence of unvaccinated people in the population, more so in some age groups and some communities where vaccination rates continue to be low, coupled with the emergence of the highly transmissible Omicron variant, poses a risk to health of the population, threatens the capacity of public health and healthcare systems to address the healthcare needs of the population, and constitutes a health hazard. So just that line alone, saying the continued presence of unvaccinated people in the population, And keep in mind, this is a very recent, I guess you could say, order in terms of like a report and so forth, which made a lot of people apparently say, well, it seems like our health officials here in BC, they don't, quote, follow the science, if that's what you want to say. Because it's kind of interesting to think about where everyone has the same science to work with. When you think about it, actually, that is a topic that's been extremely ignored here for some odd reason. What about those people, let's just say they are, quote, unvaccinated, what about those ones that have recovered naturally? How protected are they? Because with a lot of the information out right now, it seems like a lot of people have the mentality, like here in this report, that if the person's, quote, unvaccinated, they are somehow, I guess, more deadly, like they're a walking bomb, like for everyone else, which doesn't make sense scientifically. For example, like this CDC report here, apparently there's this breakdown of hospitalizations, whether the person was, say, vaccinated or not, and it's kind of interesting to think about actually, and these are all official materials too. I'm not a doctor, of course, but from looking at this chart, you can even use your own, I guess, critical thinking skills and come up to your own conclusion. But according to this, it's showing you again, what is it like when it comes to hospitalizations for people who are vaccinated or not vaccinated? And you can see this chart here. First is this solid line here. It says unvaccinated, no previous COVID-19 diagnosis. You can see how much that chart, I guess, or line is spiked up compared to everything else, huh? I guess that would be the argument of saying, for example, like the other line below, it says vaccinated, no previous COVID-19 diagnosis. You can see there, the argument would be, well, they seem like they're way more protected. I mean, look how lower the cases and stuff are, I guess you could say. But really look into it and this graph. On the other, I guess, end of the spectrum, it says unvaccinated previous COVID-19 diagnosis and vaccinated previous COVID-19 diagnosis. So in that sense, it's people who got the virus and then recovered, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. And you can see with the line here, the ones that were vaccinated but then got infected, they're pretty low, like they're really down there. You can see with that black line. But just above it, you have to kind of zoom in. That's the group of people who were unvaccinated and I guess apparently got COVID and recovered. According to this, they're almost the same thing, correct? So why would you ignore that science there? So how could you say specifically there, okay, unvaccinated people pose a danger to, like, let's just say this or that person when you're around them, where according to this, the biggest difference is whether or not someone got it and recovered ultimately. You can see here, like with the chart, you could argue, well, look at that big line on top, but that's more of someone who's never got it before, like let's just say the most vulnerable with no form of protection. So you can't just say plain out, science-wise and data-wise, according to this, it's just, quote, unvaccinated in general. It makes no logical sense according to this. I mean, someone else can chime in. If you have, like, what, a medical background and all that, it doesn't make sense in that case. Just in terms of things like these vaccine passports and all that, again, a lot of people were saying it doesn't make sense. And here it was kind of interesting because apparently the Vancouver Coastal Health issued a letter to places like UBC, like the University of British Columbia, saying how they don't think like these mandates and stuff, they work as intended. Like they say here, it says current scientific evidence, including BC data, indicates that COVID-19 vaccination, 2 doses, while effective at preventing severe illness, is not effective at preventing infection or transmission of the Omicron variant of the virus, which now accounts for almost 100% of the cases in the province. Therefore, there is now no material difference in likelihood that a UBC student or staff member who is vaccinated or unvaccinated may be infected and potentially infectious to others. We also know that Omicron causes less serious illness than other variants of COVID-19, which is particularly true for young people. That's been the consensus from what I read in general. Like, I'm not a doctor again, but if that's the science, then how does any of this make sense, like with these vaccine passports and so forth? Or again, it seems like there's still a lot of people who believe, let's just say a, quote, unvaccinated person is somehow, I don't know, like deadly than some person who is vaccinated. It doesn't make sense according to the science like this says. Now, during the press briefings too, apparently something was brought up where a person named Patty Daly, if that's how you say it, they had like this meeting before. It was part of this Build Back Better thing, and they were talking about unvaccinated people, vaccine passports, and it was kind of shocking too, in terms of them, I guess, just outright saying the vaccine passports and so forth, like what the intention was. Is it more so because, let's just say, going into, I don't know, a restaurant or something like that is so deadly that you can't have an unvaccinated person in there? Whereas they kind of implied that it was based on an incentive to get more people vaccinated. So I didn't get to really think about that. I mean, here was the video of it.
And thank you, Patty. The next question was number 3, which was we aren't allowing unvaccinated people into the restaurants, but they are still allowed to visit patients in acute care. Is this true? And if so, what are the risks?
Well, maybe I can answer this just briefly. The vaccine passport requires people to be vaccinated to do certain discretionary activities, such as go to restaurants, movies, gyms. Not because these places are high risk. We're not actually seeing COVID transmission in these settings. It's really to create an incentive to improve our vaccination coverage.
Because there's 2 points that I get just from listening to that. Of course, it's this person's, quote, opinion, I guess you could say, but these are the people of authority as well, I guess you could say, to interpret data and all that. But that's kind of implying that a lot of the places that were shut down and so forth was, quote, low risk in many ways. And at the same time, if you factor that in with things like, say, the natural immunity where a person recovered, then it really doesn't really make much sense in terms of the restrictions and all that. And even when you read some of these questions that apparently the media asked them, for example, people were wondering, hey, how about when you go to things like transit now, are people going to require masks? Because you would imagine anyways, just based on logic from what we're told, if the virus and stuff spreads easily in that way, then being crammed out with a bunch of people would be the most high risk situation, correct? But like this person wrote, in terms of the answer, it says, on transit, Henry says it is not one of the highest risk areas. Individuals can make the decision. That's in regards to wearing a mask. Yeah, but that's just so confusing, isn't it? In terms of like the science and stuff that everyone was told in general. And another interesting video that I saw, apparently it was in the US, and again, this was around the same time, it seems, when that data was forced to be released. It says here, strikingly frank answer from CDC Director Walensky on them being too bullish on vaccines early on. It's kind of weird because initially, to my understanding, most people would say, take this, do that, this is the direction, it's the best way, it's 100% or something like that or whatever. But you can see now, it seems like the person is really unsure, and it makes you wonder if that's the case because of the new data that's been released.
Could we have improved? Well, you know, I think I can tell you where I was when the CNN feed came that it was 95% effective on the vaccine. So many of us wanted to be hopeful. So many of us wanted to say, okay, this is our ticket out, right? Now we're done. So I think we had perhaps too little caution and too much optimism for some good things that came our way. I really do. I think all of us wanted this to be done. Nobody said waning when you know, oh, this vaccine's going to work. Oh, well, maybe it'll work, it'll wear off. Nobody said, well, what if the next variant it's not as potent against the next variant. And then maybe the other thing I'll say is this area of gray. I have frequently said, you know, we're going to lead with the science. Science is going to be the foundation of everything we do. That is entirely true. I think public heard that as science is foolproof. Science is black and white. Science is immediate, and we get the answer, and then we, you know, make the decision based on the answer. And the truth is, science is gray. And science is not always immediate, and sometimes it takes months and years to actually find out the answer. But you have to make, you know, decisions in a pandemic before you have that answer.
For me, I would like to see people actually explain this still, like say the health officials there, because I would think it would be important to actually go over stuff like this, right? Because I'm not a doctor. You can interpret this in any way in terms of these reports, and I could easily see if people don't have, like, say, a medical background, for example, they could misinterpret it. So that's what I want to hear. Why don't people actually debate about this or analyze this like the health officials? It's all there in terms of stuff like this, or vice versa, like that issue about like what natural immunity and all that. Why isn't all that brought up? It doesn't make sense. And I think people should actually push them to answer those questions. Because if there is something wrong here, then I think people have a right to know, correct? And you need all the data to make the best decision possible for everyone. Oh. That was crazy. All right, see you guys later.